So good morning and welcome everyone to our Fireside chat. Today we are yet again talking about hybrid work. You'd think we'd all be bored of that conversation, but it's I think 3 years on since almost 3 years on since the first lockdown. It's still something that tends to dominate the headlines and certainly the tech press. As always, I'm joined by members of our customer advisory board. So I'll very quickly just go around the table and ask you to introduce yourselves because we have a couple of new faces. So Ken, would you like to do the honours?
Good day, everybody. My name is Ken Dickey. I am the Chief Technology Officer for Leithwaite, the executive search firm.
Thank you. Madasa.
Hi, my name is Madasa Ulhaik. I'm Chief Information Officer for Waverton Investment Management, based in London.
Great. Thank you. Jazz.
I'm Jazz Bassey, Head of Solution Delivery for Gately.
And Aidan.
Aidan Shanahan, Head of IT with Govia Thameslink Railway.
And last but definitely not least, David.
Good morning, David Maskell from Factum Research, the Information Security Officer.
Fantastic, thank you. So at least we know all your microphones are working, so thanks for joining us today. Why are we talking about hybrid work, and in particular, hybrid hangover, as we've called this topic? So, hybrid work has been something that, I think we first all spoke about, probably 3 or 4 months after the first lockdown, but it's certainly something that I think is still going through a maturity cycle. Speaking to different tech firms, certainly speaking to yourselves and some of our other customers, we all know now that, hybrid work is just work, right? It's just what we do, but it has fundamentally changed the way in which most organizations manage their office space, the way in which they work, and certainly the way in which they communicate with their other employees and certainly their managers. So we thought this was a really interesting topic to pick up. It's certainly one that we get asked about a lot from a technical side. So I'm going to dive straight into the first set of questions, really, because I think we're really keen to get your different experiences around this. So if we think about, as I said, it is 3 years almost since the first lockdown hit us back in February 2020. Looking at the way in which your businesses operate today, what would you say are the biggest challenges around, and there's quite a few things on this list, but, really around kind of office space, company values, and therefore has that changed or how is that perceived? And really kind of how have you maintained or how do you aim to maintain this kind of really inclusive hybrid work environment in the fact that you've got, people working from all over the place? Who wants to start me off on that one? I'm going to pick on Aidan. Oh, I think you're on mute, Aidan.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
You hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Great stuff. I suppose we haven't changed because, inherently 2/3 of our staff are frontline staff, so they have always been in platforms, gate lines, engineering depots, maintaining trains or driving trains throughout the pandemic. It's more been sort of the back office function, and some of the roles we could, I suppose, send home during the pandemic were the ones we could send home with a laptop at short notice. We changed a lot of our systems at the very early start of the pandemic to sort of deploy AO VPN everywhere and change our VPN solution at pace. And I suppose that's probably the biggest difference staff would have seen, is that sheer kind of, whether you're at home, whether you're in an office, a station or a depot, we'll be able to support your kit, push software down to you remotely, manage it, maintain it, and troubleshoot it if you have an issue. And that's the same whether you're at home or anywhere, really. I think that was something we did very fast at the start. The biggest probable change after that was fitting Teams meeting room systems, and we fitted those in most of our offices. And I suppose we're now on almost a second round deployment out to stations and depots and other places where they wouldn't necessarily have requested or used it previously, but suddenly now it's kind of, because so much of the business meetings have switched over to Teams, it now be a default kind of thing of actually we need to get those spaces and those meeting rooms up to speed. Don't get me wrong, we don't necessarily, I suppose the big busy office ones, we tend to the Teams meeting room panels, the Bluetooth sensors for occupancy. I would say it's worth paying attention to the kit you're deploying. I think one of the biggest things we did recently, which made a huge difference for people, was we changed the boardroom camera kit to follow the speaker. So it's kind of, even though the kit was only less than a couple of years old, it's things move fairly fast. And one of the things we could do, which made a huge difference for our boardroom, and mainly because it's kind of the size of the people in there, is that it's now got a speaker tracking camera, which works automatically from the remote end, and that's made a huge difference for sort of people collaborating on those, because it tends to be a bigger room with 20 or 30 people in it with at a time kind of thing. So it's not kind of, it wasn't that hard, it wasn't that easy, and there's not so much things you could do with sort of multiple cameras weren't really going to work, whereas the speaker tracking thing really did work, whereas we've almost turned it off in some of the smaller rooms because it's a distraction. Because if there's only 6 people in the room and it tries to focus in on one person at one end of the table, then the room's not really that big enough to need it. It's you're better off with the sort of the but I suppose I'd probably say combination wise of getting people engaged and getting people used to using Teams. Now that was a huge step forwards where people had to use it. Now it's been the kind of, you're going back into offices and sort of having that hybrid mix of how are you supporting people remotely on the other end of the call as well as people in the room. And it's interesting to see who's taken to sort of using, whether people dial in and have their video and their face on the have their laptop in front of them or their tablet device in front of them showing their picture. It's interesting to see who's actually taken to doing that, because some of our exec tend to do that rather than being just another face in the boardroom camera, for example, and people remotely can see them there as well. But I suppose that's procedures and guidelines and behaviours rather than it being a technical control, really.
Rob, you're on mute.
You're on mute, Rob.
So doing my own trick. Sorry, I've got a digger outside. Yeah, from your perspective, Jazz, how was that changed for yourselves around really trying to ensure meetings are kind of inclusive and everyone's involved? Obviously, I know you've got multiple offices. You certainly work across all of them. How's that changed for you?
I think for an online meeting perspective, we try and ensure everyone's involved by everyone joining in the same way. So whether you're in an office or at home, in a coffee shop, wherever, you're all joining from a screen. We try to avoid that 3 or 4 people in a meeting room around a Teams meeting room kit with 2 or 3 people dialed in the screen watching in. It's not a voyeur piece. You've got to all be engaged in the same way. So we try and ensure people are joining in the same way. However, we do utilize those kits when we need to, when there's people that need to speak to an audience in that room. I think the biggest challenge for me is not being actually doing that scheduled meeting. It's been that sort of dynamic, impromptu thought, that innovation that you lose by everything having to be pre-planned, the days you're in the office, the ways you're working online. Every meeting has a pretty rigid agenda. You're not getting those water cooler moments you would have had pre-pandemic. So we, post-pandemic, have been back in the offices. Everyone comes in 2 days a week. Teams try to come in, at least have one team day during the course of the week and other days to support the activities they're working on. But up until recently, everyone has had their own physical desk, as I had previously. We're now starting to reconfigure the space to introduce more collaboration space, to introduce different ways of utilising the spaces in our office to get us back to being more creative, thinking of ideas in a different way, and not simply just delivering in a very fixed and regimented way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I certainly see that. I mean, we probably suffer from different issues now as well, in the fact that we've increased the number of people in our organisation by a third almost since the start of the pandemic. So we have that lumpy Thursday day, where generally Thursday's a good day for everyone to come into the office, and actually you almost, Thursday's almost the social day, which is good, but it can feel a little bit fake. And
also, I bet those people that are coming in, you're not quite sure whether that's the person you've been speaking to online for the last 2 or 3 months, or whether they're a little shorter, a little bit taller, just a little bit different to that person I've been speaking to online.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think that whole point about the agenda is really key as well. I think you generally pop someone on IM and say, or can we have a chat, and straight away it's like, oh, what's it about? What's the agenda? What do you want to talk about? Whereas when you're in the office, you do just bump into people and talk. Madassa, any kind of insight to how that's worked with yourselves?
Yeah, I guess Waverton took a drastic decision to really revamp the whole office space, I think late 2020, and take the opportunity to really introduce new kit for every meeting room to allow this hybrid meeting experience on the get-go. I think 2021 was probably when we actually realized the benefits, and I think 2 years on, it's interesting how meeting experiences and meeting catch-ups revolve around some people sitting at their desks in the office and some in a meeting room and others from home. So the whole dynamics has changed, and it's allowed I guess staff to be more efficient, I would say, during some meetings. There is a concern that your attention span may be moved away when you're at your desk during a meeting, perhaps that perhaps naturally used to be in a room face to face when you're at your desk, but in most cases it does allow staff to be more productive, I guess, or multitask, as some would say, during the course of a meeting that perhaps would have been in comparison. But generally speaking, the systems that we've deployed have really allowed us to offer staff the ability to have that flexibility and really allow staff to, at their own freedom, to join meetings from their desktops or laptops from home with the use of their devices. We have also taken a step further with the whole book your desk approach and allowed staff to consider when they are planning to come into the office to actually book their desk alongside meeting room spaces as well. And historically, it was all very much managed by a reception team, but it's now all automated using a platform and allow staff at their own freedom to just book rooms and walk into that space. Whereas historically, it used to be all driven by reception, who were very strict previously, but now they have no choice but to let us use the system to place these bookings.
Good thing. And what about the non-tech side? I know, Dave, you've got some thoughts here on kind of the more aesthetic side of meetings.
Yeah, I think the technology side, I think we've all been using Teams and remote working, blended working, as we call it at Thatcham, for a couple of years now. And I think we're pretty much there. There's still more training and awareness to do. Teams keeps evolving and improving over time. And I think that has challenges for our team to try and get used to the new technologies and the features that come out. But it's really, for me, around, we've realised over the last few months that it's the people aspect, the way that you organise meetings that make a huge difference. So a number of our regular meetings our monthly meetings had lunch in them. So what would happen is people would assume that everyone's ready for lunch at home and ready for lunch in the meeting room. And that noise that you get from everybody having that lunch break obviously echoes across the team's rooms, and that whole approach. So it's more around the etiquette that we're having to try and draft up some guidelines now and using recommendations from Microsoft and others around how the best way to operate and engage with people remotely and ask them the questions first rather than in the audience, so in the room, because we're finding that everybody's participating and talking over each other in the room, and obviously remote you can't hear that. So it's really around the etiquette and approaches to that we are trying to improve on now.
That's an interesting one, and I guess on that, from that mix as well, from people working from home a lot more. I'm assuming most of you have got some team members that are either fully remote or at home more than they're in the office. Have you found you've had to equip people with new working from home technology, desks, better chairs, those kind of things, or is that things that you typically expected employees to deal with themselves?
So maybe if I can just
I'll say you've got to be on that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So historically, the hybrid environments have been supported as part of the staff retention approach, in the fact that if we're going to, we're concerned about losing talent, if we're going to have people working from home, to actually look to make that working environment as comfortable and as engaging as possible, so that as if they were in the office. And you sort of saw that investment in the workspace actually being disseminated out into people's homes. So, Leithwaite has a policy of looking after people, making sure they've got an ergonomic chair, they've got a decent screen. Desks are a bit of a funny one because obviously not everybody has the same size room. So you have to kind of work around what options that individual has. But we even look to the point where we make suggestions about how you can accommodate a purpose-built, bespoke, stand-up, sit-down desk. And there's two sides to that, because I think it was Madasso was saying about how there was growth in their business. Leithwaite has grown quite substantially. The office hasn't, and that's because with pandemic, it has stayed the same size. So we've obviously we're actively encouraging people to not come into the office. We're actually enjoying that hybrid environment, and we want to make that as effective as possible. And so that investment in people's homes, the argument is, oh, well, hot desking means you can save money on your lease and you can use a smaller office. But in fact, actually, we're still investing. It just means it's in a different location. I mean, there is challenges with that. Obviously, how do you get an ergonomic desk and set up, checked at people's homes scattered all over the UK? And so you have to find an approach that is going to be effective and that is the same standard being consistently applied. But we're overcoming those challenges, and we're making sure that that home environment is, along with the teams. I think one of the other behavioural pieces I just wanted to pick up on is, Aidan was talking about having lots of frontline staff who have always come in over pandemic. The nature of our business, we're always out on the road and we're always meeting people. So the concept of just firing up a call from anywhere and not having a central home or going to an office was already kind of baked in. So we're looking at these, there is still an immense opportunity for our nature, the sort of business of our nature, to leverage that hybrid working in so many ways. Culturally, the non-tech side, we encourage communication far more now than we ever would if you had everybody sat at their desk in an office. The idea is, and especially with teams, just to very quickly finish off on there, is that we have a policy where you don't send people agendas, you don't send people questions, you just make a call as if you were phoning someone or whatever. And people have really embraced this. And it was a bit of a shock for me just joining Leithwaite, this idea that anybody would just call you with a video call, as if it was like family members calling you on FaceTime or something. It's like, wow, okay. And they have their cameras on, and it's surreal because somebody's calling me from the office and I'm in the office with them. I mean, it's the fact that the culture has evolved, that this is just second nature and this is just how it is, has been a fascinating insight into that hybrid change.
I think it is fascinating. I think, if I spent a bit of time before today reading, as I said at the beginning, various reports and stuff from Bloomberg and Forbes, etc. And they all talk a lot about company culture, and it's certainly something that I think we've struggled with a little bit here, and I think we get it right, and it kind of goes the other way, and it's kind of a bit flip flop sometimes in the way it's done. And part of me thinks, oh, is this just a fad? Like, we're having a conversation about trying to teach people how to be human with each other, and we are naturally sociable animals, as it were. But it still seems to be, if you believe all the reports, that actually organisations are struggling with some of these things. So I'm keen to understand your views on that, around actually how do we keep company culture going, or improve company culture, or stop company culture kind of being diluted, and almost these kind of pockets of people that can either appear, the really positive people or the really negative people that actually bring up or bring down an organisation, and how that's different now in a hybrid world than it used to be when generally everybody was in, if you kind of get what I mean. So, Aidan, do you have any comments on that at all?
I suppose.
Is it a problem? Is it a problem? I guess is the first thing. Is it a problem for you?
I suppose it isn't really a problem for us. I mean, I suppose you've always had that challenges of how some staff get on or don't get on, whether they're remote or in the office. Really, it's that hasn't changed in that regard. I think Jazz's point about the water cooler moments being missing is probably my biggest takeaway, in that we generally we run half in, half out. For the back office staff who are not frontline based, then they can be in sort of 2 to 3 days a week and sort of remote for a couple of days to sort of suit and give them that flexibility of their lives. But the flip side of it is that we expect you to be in, we expect you to be working, and we expect you to be sort of having that sort of collaboration piece when you're in the office, because I suppose it's changed from expecting someone be sat at a desk 9 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever hours they were working. I think the biggest thing about it is there's probably that level of trust that probably came for most organisations through the pandemic, and it probably came for a lot more organisations than it would have ever done previously, because you either do the work or you don't do the work. We're going to know from the output whether you're doing the work or not, remotely or in the office. So I think that flexibility for staff at home has sort of come in around, and I know some of my team value that with sort of seeing their kids a lot more, should we say, and sort of doing things they couldn't have done previously.
Yeah.
But I think the big one for me is how you support that mix, really. And we have the same sort of peak of Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays tend to be the busier days in the office. And we one of the main offices we reduced the floor because of the pandemic, and we went totally hot desking and booking the desks out. We because we had the chance to rebuild the floor we were keeping, we took out some offices and put in some individual offices and put in some collaboration spaces instead, which was great support from my exec to sort of say, take away our offices and give us the hybrid working space instead. So they're sat on a row of desks the same as anyone else would be now. It's I suppose I think we've not really seen it as an issue with people working remotely or not. I think it's more just being very, very conscious of what you can support as a business while still achieving the business aims. It's kind of we would never be fully remote, for example, because we have to. I mean, if you look at sort of the area station managers or the station managers, they're in working, and the engineering managers are all in with their staff because that's where their staff are. It's a bit different with the sort of some of the back office functions where they can do a bit remotely, but others are on shift pattern working. So we'll always probably a bit of a different beast just with the sort of combination of staff we have, really.
I guess respect's a key thing as well, isn't it? We think about the different ways in which people work and respecting the fact that now work now fits a lot better, I think, for most people around their personal lives and other things, and vice versa. Jazz, have you got any comments on that at all? Has things changed for you? Has it always been that way? Is communication and culture a problem in the hybrid workspace?
It depends on how you're using the space. The office can't simply be another desk, because if it is, you're going to do nothing different than you're going to be doing at home. It's got to be a collaboration space. It's going back to points around culture. The office has got to be conducive to either establishing or re-establishing that culture that was there pre-pandemic. And that if you're not getting those things right in the office, you're not going to. You might as well close your office, because it's just real estate you've just got there that's not of no benefit. You've got, if the offices are there to provide that collaboration, as Aidan mentioned, to provide that innovation that you get through that face-to-face conversation, that challenge. They've got to be those kind of spaces, and they've got to be the piece that picks up the cultural piece to ensure that everyone's bought into the company ethos, culture, and the way the company wants to work. You're right. It's finding the balance of what the individual needs, what the company needs, but also how those things marry up. It's going to be different from firm to firm as to what their clients need as well. But for us, we've got everyone in 2 days a week, as with everyone else. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays are those peak days. I don't know what we do or anyone else is doing regarding getting people in on different days, unless you're actually assigning people days to come in the office, which I know pre-pandemic some firms to try and maximize their real estate were starting to do, but that was not about the modern way of working. That was simply about maximizing their real estate. So
to Jazz's point, actually, I have worked in an environment where they had team A with team B, and what you actually found was that then siloed those groups of people, and it became really counterproductive, because all of a sudden you're saying that group comes in over here, that group comes up, and never the twain shall meet. So what I think is really important, and what Jazz called out really quite clearly, was that these offices are now those collaboration hubs. It's the place where you come in and you actually get that chance to mix with your colleagues. Yes, you might have been working very hard. You're very much hitting the nail on the head when it's all about sort of, we can see outcomes. It's all about, we all know and trust you to be working because we can see or not see the outcomes that we require. So actually using the office space is then a case of getting everybody together to go, right, how do we define that company culture? Seeing the managing partner sat on the same desk next to you, next to an assistant, next to a researcher, and we're all in this together, kind of actually really builds that as a team event, and it really brings that collaboration together. The water cooler events, as I say, the way we work, I'm not so sure we miss out on those so much, but it is actually a good point to to raise that they are there still as an option. But for me, it's that whole getting a sense of we're all in this space, all working together, collaborate. You actually really doubling down on that term, collaborating together. It's not just another desk, because again, we have one of those at home. So why did I come into London today? I came in because I want to be with my colleagues and my peers so that we can actually really get on with what we see as the work that we have to hand. So I think that's a really important piece about what the spaces have become.
And one thing I think we've all focused on is those spaces and the teams that were in pre-pandemic and how we want them to work now. I think less consideration is given generally to what we're doing to attract new talent. What is it that talent out there wants from an organisation, from a way of working? I think we'll go and survey our teams, we'll go and survey our organisations, but what are we doing to understand what new talent wants?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think, you both touched on a couple of interesting points which make you think about, actually what the office was about before. And I think, you see a lot of organisations and again, articles that will talk about, people don't want to come back to an office that was the way it was in 2019. And I think, that point about just another desk is really key. I think we're talking about, you hear a lot about, you've got to make the commute worth it, right? And I think actually commute is cost, the commute is time. And it also defines your day to an extent. It certainly defines the start and the end of your day, because you've got, generally got travel around it, which for some people can be quite extensive. It impacts the school run, blah, blah, blah. But I think there's also things that we probably used to do in the office that we did in the office because that's what we always did. It was the default place to go, that probably weren't great to start with. There was probably culture and things that happened in the office that probably weren't best suited for the office, that we actually do far more effectively, being able to just kind of work wherever we want to work. For me, that's probably focus time. I think if I've got things I need to do that require, might be prep for this, for example, I find it really hard to do that in the office because of interruptions. Whereas knowing that I can kind of put that do not disturb up when I'm working remotely, I guess is either seen as a positive thing because I don't get disturbed, because people can't disturb me because the tech won't allow it. But also it can come across very, it can come across very rude, I guess, as well, if I'm not available. Whereas, as you say, if you're in the office, people can see whether you're engaged or not. Dave, any thoughts on my ramblings around that?
I think you're right. I think the focus time, I'm exactly the same. The focus time for me is the bit that I have to do remotely. I cannot do in the office. There's too many distractions, too many people walking around, too many conversations in the big open office, that focus time is the one that just doesn't work. One of the problems that we found with focus time is that Microsoft and their technologies now obviously block 2 hours of focus time, but they don't really define what that is. And everybody was getting blocked out with focus time, and nobody was really understanding what they were going to do during that time, and then just overbooking meetings for it anyway. So one of the things we've tried to do within the IT team is just to try and refocus that, apply a different name to that focus time to say that it is critical work on this project. So everybody knows that you are not just focusing and just blocking out some time to do some emails, that you're actually trying to deliver on a product and get an output from it. So that does have a positive effect because people can see you're working on that critical project and they understand why. So that does help.
I think also, just to add, I think there was a comment around trust. I think trust has always been an issue pre-pandemic, and the fact that we now have the ability to work from home and serve our clients in the same manner that perhaps we used to serve them in the office has also been a key driver, and allowing your staff to really work on their initiatives from home in the same way that they used to work in the office. I think different business units have different objectives and requirements in terms of collaboration. Some work better when they're around each other. Some can effectively work well from home. I mean, IT without a doubt has proven that collaboration is possible with the use of Teams and having a video running concurrently alongside your work if needed for a duration. It's the same as sitting around the desk effectively, right? In my view, and you can still have that same experience, and continue that conversation on chat. I think that's also quite key. I tell my team members that if you are working from home, I know you might feel isolated, but stay in contact with your fellow colleagues over video chat for a period of time during the course of the day. So we do have a set time every day where those that are working from home, that work in the same team with their colleagues, is that they have a video live call that's just connected for a duration of an hour, so that they can pick up on any queries or issues and collaborate and leverage any knowledge if required.
That's an interesting one, actually. If you don't mind me digging into that one. So is that essentially you have a portion of the day, an hour of the day, I think you said, where you're not necessarily on a video call with each other, but the video call is kind of open, right? So you're working away, you might be working, you might be mute, but your team are there. So encouraging people just to have that spot conversation. Is that kind of what you do?
Absolutely. We do that. We encourage to do that because it allows others to pick up on certain items that perhaps, that you would have done when you're around the desk. Because when you're around the desk, I mean, I'm in the office today and I'm literally walking over, speaking to my colleagues. And it's that kind of collaboration that we encourage from home as well. And what's interesting is also when you have new starters join the team, you want to keep that collaboration more frequent, and that's quite key for me as well.
I love that. Has anyone else got any kind of I think that's a really obvious thing to do on what we've just talked about. We're trying to, blurring the lines between, making hybrid work not a thing anymore. That's just kind of what we do. Anyone else done anything interesting to?
I think one of the ones there about the new starter, that's a really interesting piece, because that's one of the hardest challenges when you've got, say, a new graduate who this may be their first job. Right. And then they're being told, well, you just sit at home for Mondays and Fridays and come in on a Thursday, that engagement piece. And so I do know that we actually actively encourage other associates, other partners to literally do that. Have a call open for half an hour, just so that individual can feel that they've got access to that person, even though it's not necessarily an out and out meeting. It's just that's running. And we've been trying that for a little while with the new starters. I have to be honest, it's a real challenge because not everybody warms to it. The idea that there's a camera in the corner of the room. And so it is not everybody's cup of tea, but it is something that we're looking to try and refine so that we can at least get that engagement, especially with those people new to the firm.
Yeah, we decided to ask the new chaps. In fact, we had two recent hires. So for me, it was a bit of a challenge actually, and having new hires during post-pandemic and train them up is quite important to upskill them, bring them up to speed, get them to collaborate. We actually told them that you're going to be in the office for a good month and a bit, every single day. So they've gone through that phase now, but now I'm faced with now they work from home challenge and how we keep them interacting and keep them engaged. But again, it's that continuous. I mean, the tools that we have, we just have to maximize and use them to encourage them to keep conversation flow with us in the office, and vice versa, really, when they're in the office and for those that are working from home. Rob, sorry, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
I've got diggers outside, so I keep putting myself on digging up the road. So, I think certainly something I've seen, and speaking to some of my direct reports and their the teams that report into them, I think you have to be a lot more, I think, of a visual manager than probably beforehand. I think those regular one-to-ones which were always in person over lunch, which are now tend to now either shift beginning of the day or end of the day to fit in with other things that are going on. But I think you've got to be much more aware, and I think ask the questions about how people are feeling. And I think the well-being of people is key. I mean, certainly some of my team over the last 3 years, their lives have changed. They've got married, or they've had children, or they've had other things gone in their lives. And I think it's when you meet people face to face, you generally have those off-topic conversations, because there's no fear of that call being recorded or captured or anything else. You're generally out and about. Whereas I've certainly found it harder, even myself, I think, probably to be as open over a video call. So I think the point about, when to meet up and when to do things in person, because remote is easy, and sometimes it can be easy to shift those meetings to remote to fit in with things rather than to reschedule them to really get that important FaceTime. Anyone got any tips on how you've kind of worked to do that, or work with your managers to keep that alive? I'm going to pick on you, Dave.
I think in reality, we're still struggling to a certain extent with that. I think we are trying to have less meetings, certainly on the key projects, but try to group them together. So we've got a key project meeting tomorrow where we have booked half a day with the Surface Hub, and we're just going to get in a room and all work together. I think that has some benefits, and for us, that takes it almost back to the old school way of working. We all get in a room, we solve a problem. Is that the utopia moment? Probably not, because the chances are somebody will have a last minute issue and not be able to attend. So it is still one that we're working on, if I'm honest. I think it's
does that happen more? Do you find that happens more? Do you I think I remember the days of you would be in for a meeting and generally you found a way of making it happen, whereas I think now it's certainly I see it's very common to a meeting that starts off with everyone being in, and it ends up being actually most people at the last minute something happens and they can't get in. Does that happen more, do you think, now than it did before?
Yeah, I think that is definitely more common than it ever was before. And one of the and actually it's a regular reoccurring information security meeting that we have. One example of that is that was the most engaging collaborative meeting we've ever had, and now with over half the attendees remote, it almost feels like a show and tell. You almost talk through a presentation and talk through it, and you don't get that collaboration that we had before. So we're now looking at ways to enhance that both remote and on-prem sort of meetings.
Let's go on to that one for the last 10 minutes or so. Let's think about how we are doing those things, right? I think you've all touched on some really interesting topics today. How technology is not the answer to everything, right? We've touched on a lot of that is about how we manage people, trust, respect, all those other things. There's a comment in the chat actually just about, how do you get over that either perception or reality of the 4-hour lunch on a Friday, which always used to be the case, right? Friday was always a day that people used to work from home, which actually is what kind of spun that mindset of, if you're working at home on a Friday, you're not really working. So, Mark, to answer your point, it's an interesting one, but where do we use technology? Where's technology helping us kind of close that hybrid gap, if you like, between all in person and all remote? Because either of those things is okay. It's the bit together that's hard, isn't it? Who wants to start me off? Ken, you've got any thoughts on that?
So it's an interesting one, because that closing of the gap does vary from industry to industry. If my partners have a long lunch on a Friday afternoon for 4 hours, they're actually doing business, right? So it's again that perception of what is productivity, what is we trust, respect, etc. And I think what has shifted is outcomes. We are now much more outcome focused, and what the hybrid environment allows us to do, and what the tech's allowing us to do, is people are allowed and afforded the opportunity to provide successful outcomes at any time of the day. And so you might have a 4-hour lunch on a Friday, but you will get home and possibly then work for 4 hours because the tech's allowed you to connect in, pick up email. You've been able to have a video conference call with another part of the world or whatever, as opposed to have to do it from the office because that's where the network ran through. And I think the tech has evolved to the point where it's that, we talk about work from home. There is obviously the extension of that, the work from anywhere. And actually all of these things are plugging those gaps in people's lives. And certainly this is very true for, I think, certainly Western cultures. And I think we should be quite conscious. This is very much UK focused. That doesn't necessarily work for other markets outside of, say, the UK, the US, or mainland Europe. And so what we're doing is we're actually affording ourselves a far greater chance to spend time with our friends and family, but actually still deliver the outcomes. And that's where that tech is filling the gap. I don't think there's one tech that is something we should call out. Teams is not the silver bullet, VPNs are not the silver bullet, but a combination of all of these things, that mobility and that work from anywhere at any time, I think really has opened up avenues for people to really continue to be really productive. And that's where the hybrid gaps, I think, get filled by the tech.
Yeah, and I think we're back actually to, and I'll let someone else comment on the tech in a second, but I think we are again back to that point. It's all about, I really do believe it is all about culture, trust, as you say, output driven. You know, what is it we expect of our people and what do they expect from us? Because I think it's a lot more of a two-way thing now, and it probably was before. It was all about what we want from our employees rather than what our employees want from us.
Actually, that's a really good call out, because in a market for us where we're really struggling to get talent, etc., that idea that we're showing and respecting our colleagues and we trust and respect them, actually that is a really, really empowering part of the culture that means that people want to stay and want to carry on working for this firm. So I think if you get that right, it is a two-way street, and it really does become a real beneficial piece for attracting talent as well. So I mean, there is a lot to be said for the opportunity there,
and it has to be real, right? As well, I think, you know, it's very easy to talk about you know, how we do this and how we trust and outcome driven and stuff, but you know, in appraisals and those kind of things, are people that are employees that can't start before 9:30, for example, because they've got, you know, school runs to do and those kind of things, or have to be on the school run at 4:30. Is that, I'll ask a question to all of you, do we think that is now honestly well respected across all teams in the business, or is that still quite frowned upon, even though to all those points they might be working at 7 in the morning and they might be working at 9 at night? Dave, any thoughts on that, your side?
Yeah, I think it is still a work in progress. I think it is more accepted now than ever has been before, and I think, you know, taking on the points again, output driven, output focused work is definitely the way forward, but it is taking time, and there's still I think allowing that flexibility is right for the colleagues and the well-being of the company. But you know, sometimes you get the old school meeting scheduled at 9 o'clock, and you know, we just need to just try and embrace that approach and try and be a bit more flexible. So it is still very much a work in progress, but we are making good strides towards it.
I sort of laugh sometimes when I see the you know, your insights report or whatever it is, whatever it's called, where it kind of says, you know, you did this number of hours out of hours, and you think at one point we're talking about everything being, you know, work when you need to, output driven stuff, yet you've still got the tools in some case, I think, you know, reminding people, great, you did, you know, or great or bad, you did 4 hours outside of your working hours last week. You know, is that 9 to 5 day gone? Do you think it will? I appreciate there is a difference in different parts of the globe, but do you think it will go? Do you think that concept of 9 to 5 will go?
I think from my point of view, yes, it already probably was. I think the challenge is now with those tools is to understand what the data is telling you. I know a number of my team are working way beyond their working hours, and that is they're then susceptible to burnout and things like that. So it's just that awareness, I think, is important. And as I say, maybe those tools need to be updated to allow for a little bit more flexibility on your working hours and the more modern approaches.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really important call out, because that's the other piece. By making work so accessible and so available from everywhere, we actually have to, as leaders, kind of look at how we manage our teams and call out that people aren't expected to work 100 hours. That it doesn't necessarily get them a bigger bonus or more recognition. That, you know, we need to recognize that one of the great things about a 9 to 5 was you only did 39 hours in a working week, and that was considered normal, right? And if you did a little bit of overtime, you got recognition for overtime. Now we've got this situation where, you know, you can start at 7 in the morning, still be online at 7 o'clock at night, and actually people are accepting this as normal. With my own team, it's like I have to say to them, why are you answering this message? Why are you doing this work? Stop. And it's like, oh, but I can, because it's on my phone and it's on my iPad. And we actually have to really be conscious that, yeah, productivity is improved, but that's because people are now doing a 60-hour week. And we've spent the last 20, 30 years trying to drive down the amount of time people spend working. I mean, we've got to be really mindful that this can be counterproductive and burn people out.
Yeah, so you kind of got this, you know, much more flexible, but I think what you're saying is it's much more flexible, but actually people are probably working longer hours, which then I guess goes back to that point of, are they being productive? Are they doing the right work? just because they can respond to something. You know, I certainly see more people on the CC list on emails than I probably ever have. And people feel compelled, I think, if someone does respond at 7 at night, 8 at night, 9 at night, you kind of see this, either no one replies or everyone replies, because once one person replies, they kind of feel, well, I should reply because I can. You know, so it's interesting battle. We're just about out of time, but as anyone, I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. We've gone on for hours on this. Perhaps we will next time. Has anyone got any final thoughts or final words of wisdom about technology or process or something completely different that you've implemented that's been really successful? Or on the flip side, have you still got a massive problem that you're trying to overcome around hybrid? I
think having the right toolkits at your disposal will make effective hybrid working work well. Having legacy technologies that perhaps rely on personal devices, the whole bring your own device concept and so forth, with cameras streaming through a VDI or a remote desktop, that experience, I mean, it's long gone, which is great, but I think it's important to have a device that can seamlessly work when staff are in the office and from home. And I think from our perspective, having implemented much of that to support this hybrid working model has helped us tremendously. I mean, as far as sport calls are concerned, thankfully they're not related to the voice calling or the meeting supports. But at the same time, also implementing technology in your offices with more flexi rooms to allow that interaction in meeting rooms as well is quite key. So in combination, tech for us at Waverton has very much benefited from those aspects.
Yeah, thank you. And anybody else? Great. I think we will wrap it up there. Listen, thank you. It's been great audience participation as well. So to all of you, Mark, Harry, etc., thank you for your open comments as well. Hopefully, we've answered the majority of those throughout the chat. Team, as always, thank you for your participation. It's been some really interesting conversations. I've taken a few bits of advice that you've shared there that I think I'm certainly going to try and adopt. I love this open. It's almost this open mic concept of. It actually reminds me of my nieces who seem to just broadcast their life on Instagram and just have open calls that anyone can join. But I actually quite like the concept of that. It's something I might give a try. So thank you very much, and look forward to seeing you all probably in our Christmas hats and jumpers for next month's show, as we'll be leading up to Christmas. So thanks very much.